Good evening. An unreasonable delayed start, but here we go. We're on the bottom of Chav Testament Aleph at a new Mishnah, 4 lines from the bottom. And we have a lot of ground to cover. I'm going to try and pick up the pace. We're going to learn Chav Testament Beis, Lamed Amid Aleph, and then the gift of a daf, which is Daf Lamed Amid Beis, which will bring us to that Mishnah there. And then what's today? Today's Tuesday. So tomorrow we'll learn Lamed Aleph and we'll get to the top of Lamed Beis. On Thursday, Mir Hashem will have a siyum. We'll learn Daf Lamed Beis. And then the siyum, which is going to be sponsored by Rob Cohn Anonymous. If anyone is interested in signing up who has yet to sign up, please let me know. That's true. Right. So if you're interested in signing up and you haven't told me, please let me know. You have until the end of the night tomorrow to let me know, and then we're going to do some ordering in the morning. All right, here we go. Mishnah, the bottom of Chav Testament Aleph. We're moving into the world of the Daled Parshios. This Gemara has a little bit of nuance to it, but we'll be able to get through it well. Says the Mishnah, Rosh Chodesh Adar, Shechalios b'Shabbos. If Rosh Chodesh Adar coincides with Shabbos, Korin b'Parshas Shkalim. On that day, we read Parshas Shkalim, which means in addition, seemingly it means this way. This is what we're used to. Although we'll see in the Gemara there was another Shita, but what we're used to is that we bring out another Sefer Torah and we read from Parshas Shkalim. But in this case, remember, it's Rosh Chodesh, Shabbos, Shkalim. So it's 3 Sefer Torah. We'll see if that plays out. Next in the Mishnah, Chalios B'socha Shabbos. If it happens to be that Rosh Chodesh falls out during the week, then Makdimin L'Sha'avar. Then we move Parshas Shkalim to the previous Shabbos. And then Umafsikin L'Shabbos Acheres. We take a break for one Shabbos. And then we move on to the next of the Daled Parshios. In other words, week number 1 is Shkalim, week number 2 is off, and then Bishniya Zachor, the second Parsha, which is week 3, is going to be Parshas Zachor, as we're familiar with around the time of Purim. Bishlishi is Para Aduma, and Biravi is the fourth of the Daled Parshios, as Achodesh Azelachem, which is going to be close to Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Bechamishis, on the 5th week, then we go back to normal Chozron L'Chesidron. It's a bit of a strange language. Of course, we know we're going to go back to where we are. This is actually hinting to a machlokes in the Tanoim. Is it Tanoim or Amoraim? I will see the Gemara. I can't remember which one right now. That there's a machlokes about what it is that people used to do and how we are going to get back to that. And then the Gemara says, La kol mafsikin. What does it mean, La kol mafsikin? We stop for everything. Take a look at Rashi, 6 lines from the bottom. Dibur hamascha, La kol mafsikin. La kol mafsikin milikros be'inyan hayom. Whatever we would normally lay with on that day, we're willing to interrupt. The korim be'inyan moed me'in ha'ma'ora. And we're going to read about the holiday that is upon us with a different laning. So we're going to change whatever our laning is. What holidays meet the requirements to break our laning of regular, says the Mishnah, 2 lines from the bottom, V'roshei Chodashim, V'Chanukah, U'V'Purim, V'Tainios, U'V'Ma'amados, U'Vyom HaKippurim. All of those sound familiar. Just a reminder, anyone remember what the Ma'amados were, the lanings of the Ma'amados? So what we had said is in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, when there was a Mishmar and there was a corresponding Maimed, and that was Yisraelim who were in their communities, they'd read from Sefer Bereshis. This we learned about earlier in some Masechta. That wasn't here. That was in Tainus. Is that here? Here? I can't remember. It's in Tainus. It is in Tainus, yeah. Definitely in Tainus. So that's what the Ma'amah. What? I know, that's why I stopped thinking about it. Yeah, it has to be. I think it was at the end of the Masechta. Yeah, not a question anymore. Okay, very good. So now we're going to dig in. This first question seems to be a little out of left field. It doesn't seem really related to the Daled Parshios, but there is one thing that's in this small little sugya that we will underscore that will carry some weight throughout the rest of the next Amud. Says the Gemara as it opens on the bottom line of Chav Testament Aleph. Tanan Hasan, we have a Mishnah from Maseches Shkalim. Deep breath. Be'echad be'adar, on the 1st of the month, Mashmiin. What does Rashi say by Mashmiin? Rashi says Be'achrazas Bezdin. We have an announcement in Bezdin al Hashkalim in regards to the requirement to pay Shkalim, and Ve'ala Kilayim, warning people about the Isser of Kilayim. So says the Gemara, I understand some of this, but not all. Bishlama ala Kilayim. I understand why the Bezdin will make an announcement about Kilayim. That's a big deal. Dizman Zriyahi, because in the month of Adar, that's when Zriya takes place. What month is Adar in our calendar, approximately? Let's call it March, right? That's not when you plant. You plant at a different time than that. And Tosfos picks up on this. And if you look at the second line of, or let's start from the beginning. Tosfos says, "Dibur maschel ala kilaim dizman zrihi." Nope, lav davka dizman zriya. Shaharei lo have hazman shemefarish b'hamekabel, and perak hamekabel and bava mitzia. We described it as a different time. Elaratsalomar. Really, what is the Gemara saying? Sof zriya. It's really the end of zriya. Ukfar gadlo hatfuos, and this is by the time when you can actually see the grains growing out of the ground, v'hazraim, and the seeds growing whatever they're growing. Only then are you able to actually see that kilaim are a possibility. So it's a fair warning. Hey guys, things are starting to bud, things are starting to bloom. Please be careful about kilaim. But if you're prior to Adar, then you would have no clue about the possibility of it. So that's not the concern. So says the Gemara, we understand why Bezdin had to be machris about the shkalim, about the kilaim. Ela al hashkalim on the second line of Chavtesim and Bez Minola. How do we know that one is obligated to have the Bezdin announce that there's a need to pay for shkalim, but it's a month in advance? Because we know from the Mishnah and shkalim that yes, we announce on Aleph Adar, but we don't pay until Aleph Nisan. So says the Gemara, I'll tell you exactly how we know that we're obligated to have the Bezdin announce, or I should say better, how we know that we need a 1 month announcement prior to the actual requirement of giving the shkalim. Amar Reb Tavi says, and this is the shita that we need to remember and underscore. Amar Reb Tavi, Amar Rabbi Yoshia, da Amar Kra, Zos olas chodesh bechodsho. This is what we read in Rosh Chodesh. So what's the drasha on this? Amra Torah, the Torah teaches us, Chadesh behave korban mitruma chadasha. The year is going to turn, and we need to make new the korbanos with a different giving. We need new monies. And since in the month of Nisan, we need to start with new korbanos, with animals that come from this year's money instead of last year's funds, kadminan v'karinan be'echad be'adar, we go earlier and we have the Bezdin announce their machriz on the 1st of Adar, ki hechi deleisu shkalim lemikdash, so that people know a month in advance that they need to bring money to the Beis HaMikdash so that they can refill the coffers of the Beis HaMikdash and start with paying for the korbanos tzibor from a new fund. Says the Gemara Kiman, who does this shita align with? Well, it certainly doesn't align with Delo ke Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. We had said that we need a 1 month warning in regards to the Aleph Nisan deadline of giving the Chatzi Shekel. But here, what we're going to see is Rabban Gamliel that in general we need a 1 month warning, but rather, says the Gemara, the Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, had it been that it was Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, Ha'amar shtei Shabbosos, he says that really we only need 2 weeks of warning. Where do we see precedent for 2 weeks of warning? From a very, very famous brisa. Says the Gemara 12 lines down to Tanya, Shal and Behilchos Pesach Kodem La Pesach Shloshim Yom. The Tanakama in this brisa holds that when it comes to the laws of Pesach, we need 30 days notice. However, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer Shtei Shabbosos. So we see from Rashbag that 2 weeks is a very reasonable amount of time as a precursor to any particular event. So why here would it be that it's a month of announcements for shkalim? Why does Bezdin announce the Machzis Shekel on Aleph Adar 4 weeks out? We see that Rashbag holds in other places that 2 weeks is enough. So maybe we should say that our Mishnah is not like Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. So says the Gemara, that's not correct. Afilu tema Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel kevan the Amar Mar bechamisha asar bo shulchanos yoshvin b'Medina uvekafe yoshvin b'Mikdash. Since the shulchanos here is a reference, of course we know their shulchanos are tables, but here it's a reference to the currency exchange effectively, so that you'd go in with a full shekel, they'd give you half a shekel back. However, you had a $10 bill, $20 bill. They were ready to have a foreign currency, whatever it was, to change you out. But when did those need to be set up? 2 weeks out in the Medina. And on the 25th of Adar, Yoshvin b'Mikdash, then they'd get all settled with their tables in the Beis HaMikdash to really get toward the end of the month. So therefore, says the Gemara, when we say 2 weeks, even according to Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, we still mean 2 weeks. But it's not 2 weeks from the deadline of paying the Chatzi Shekel. It's from the 2 weeks where the currency exchange guys are going to set up their tables in the community. Mishum Shulchanos Kadminan Vikarinan. That's what Rashi says here, 15 lines down. Dibra Hamaskal Mishum Shulchanos Kadminan. Le'echad be'adar. Dahainu Shnei Shabbosos. It's 2 weeks before the money changers are going to pull out their little booths. The time of Rashbag v'Rabbanan b'Perakama d'Psachim. We learned about it there as to why he holds 2 weeks. That's not for now. So we're on the first very long line. And we've learned one mini sugya so far. And this mini sugya indicated Why is it that we need to speak about kilayim? That's obvious. We don't want people to violate anything. Why did Bezdin have to announce about shkalim? To give us 4 weeks of notice, or according to Rashbag, 2 weeks of notice until the shulchanos have to be out, which is 2 weeks before Aleph Nisan. What's a little bit difficult in the Gemara is what we're about to learn. Says the Gemara, my Parshas Shkalim. What is the Kriyas HaTorah that we should read on Parshas Shkalim? We're familiar what it is. It's kisisa. But says the Gemara, that's not simple. That's not simple. Machlokes, Rav and Shmuel. This will carry us until about a third from the bottom of the page. So this thick piece of the middle of the Gemara is all going to be on this topic. What do we lane? Machlokes. Rav amar tzabis b'nei Yisrael amar talehem es korbani lachmi. Everybody knows this pasuk. It's from laning. It's the laning of Rosh Chodesh. So Rav holds it. It's not a special set of psukim that speaks about shkalim. It's just about the psukim from Rosh Chodesh. That's what we read for Parshas Shkalim. Ushmuel Amar, no, he says Kisisa. We, of course, paskin like Shmuel in this case. We know what we read. We're familiar with it. Beginning of Parshas Kisisa. Fine. Says the Gemara. Bishlama Lamanda Amar Kisisa. I understand Shmuel's opinion. We're going to have 5 questions here. Bishlama Lamanda Amar Kisisa. I understand that Shmuel says we read about Kisisa. Hainu Dekarila Parshas Shkalim Dechsi Bashkalim. It talks about Shkalim. It speaks about Shkalim. Now, it doesn't speak about shkalim in the way we'd think, and we're going to ask that question shortly. But nevertheless, it does speak about shkalim. Elalamanda Amar, according to Rav, who says it's the pasuk of Es Korbani Lachmi, Hachamidi Shkalim Ksivi Hasam. Where do you see the word shkalim? We lane it 25 times a year. The laning of Rosh Chodesh is something we're very familiar with. It doesn't speak about shkalim. So how could Rav possibly say that Parshas Shkalim is read from Rosh Chodesh laning, which doesn't speak about shkalim? Great question. The Gemara says, is it possible that this section may make a reference to the shkalim? Says the Gemara, in fact, the section of Rosh Chodesh does make such a reference. Taimamai Kidereb Tavi. Reb Tavi was the shita that we saw on the top of the page. And just as a refresher, if you look on the lines 2 and 3 from the top of the page, what did Reb Tavi quote? He quoted a pasuk from Rosh Chodesh laning, Zos Olas Chodesh Bechodsho, and he said, this is our reminder about giving new money, Truma Chadasha, to the Beis HaMikdash. So what do we see? That the laning of Rosh Chodesh does remind us of Truma, even though it doesn't use the word shkalim, but it reminds us that we're obligated to give truma, that we're obligated to give a new gift. So says the Gemara 5 lines into the Y lines. Well, if that's true, then my question needs to be flipped the other direction. I understand the shita of Rav, who says that the Parshas Shkalim that we read on that particular Shabbos is the psukim of Rosh Chodesh. I got it, because that's how Rav Tavi understood that those psukim hint to the fact that new coins need to be given in the next season. Got it. But according to the shita of Shmuel, who says that we read Kisisa, Korbanos Miksivi, does it talk about Korbanos not over there? And not only that, even when it talks about Shkalim Le'adanim Ksivi, it was only there talking about Shkalim Le'adanim, which were the sockets. It was talking about coins that were going to be used to make something else. It wasn't even talking about Shkalim for the Beis HaMikdash Bichlal. So what was Shmuel talking about? Yeah, beautiful. Kisisa, you're going to read the whole thing. It doesn't even talk about the same topic. Nobody's talking. It's crazy. Why would we even think to read it? So the Gemara says, it's a great question, but we have a real answer to it. And if you look at the psukim there, and I have on the bottom here in the Oz V'Hadar, all the psukim are listed in Oz Katan Beis and the Torah Or Shalim. If you look there, it says, as Rav Yosef writes in our Gemara, 7 lines down in the wide lines, Kedetani Rav Yosef, Shalosh Trumos, and it speaks about Truma 3 times in the psukim. Shal Mizbeach LaMizbeach. The money that goes in, which are shkalim for the mizbeach, 1 truma will go to the mizbeach. V'shal adanim la'adanim, v'shal bedek habayis, the bedek habayis. Don't worry, you're right. Basic pashup pshat in the psukim is not that way. Pashup pshat in the psukim is that we're not even talking about monies to go to korbanos bichlal. We're not talking about shkalim for the Beis HaMikdash. We're talking about shkalim for the adanim. But because of a drasha there in a brisa that Rav Yosef brought, Rav Yosef, the 3rd century Amora, this was Abaye's Rebbe, so he had a brisa that solves this problem for Shmuel. The Gemara asks another question, 10 lines into the Y lines. I understand the sheet of Shmuel, who says that when we read Parsha Shkalim, it's the Parsha of Kisisa. Hainu Dishani. That's because we now have something different. Hainu Dishani, Hai Rosh Chodesh, Mish'ar Rosh Chodashim. We have something that's different on Rosh Chodesh. We lane Kisisa, and Rosh Chodesh is a different laning. But if Shabbos falls out to be Shkalim and Rosh Chodesh, what happens? Korbani, my shani. It's the same Kriyas HaTorah. If it's Rosh Chodesh and Shkalim, what are you laning? How many times you read it? Once It's only one kriya, but for two things. How do you know that you're reading anything for shkalim? If Shabbos falls out on Rosh Chodesh, it's the same kriya, and it's only done once. We're going to see that laning back in the day wasn't the way that we had it. We're going to see that today, that we're used to a 12-month cycle, and there are shitas that had a 3-year cycle, which the Gemara says later. That's for sure.
The master for Rosh Chodesh is only the Rosh Chodesh master, not the. But when you are,
yeah, you got give it some time, because you're going to see a shita that's not like the way you're saying. That's what we do l'maisa, but there's a shita that's drastically different than that. So we'll get there. So says the Gemara, 15, whatever, I don't know, where are we? Almost a third of the way down, a little bit more. The Kriyas Torah, when Rosh Chodesh falls out on the same day that we reach Shkalim, it should be the same Kriya. Says the Gemara, it's different in a different way. Shani, Te'ilu Roshei Chodashim, Karushisa be'inyane diyoma, V'chad b'derosh Chodesh. So this is what David was saying, is that really on Rosh Chodesh, we read 6 aliyahs of whatever the Shabbos laning is. V'chad b'derosh Chodesh. That's normal for Rosh Chodesh. V'ilu ha'idna kulhu b'derosh Chodesh. Here, there is no Shabbos laning. We only lane that day, Rosh Chodesh. So we break it up. I don't even know how you do that. You break it up into 7 aliyahs. It's Shabbos, and we already learned in the previous Mishnah. It's not that long of an aliyah. It's very difficult to break it up. It's not so simple. It's not so simple. It's not simple. But that's what the Gemara says, is that their minhag that day was. That's why this answers your question, is that the Gemara's havamina is that they didn't lane normally when it was Shkalim and Rosh Chodesh. What they did is they took the laning of Rosh Chodesh and they very slowly, 3 psukim at a time. Again, I don't even know how it would be very hard to do it. It would be very, very hard to do it. I don't know what they did. Maybe they repeated everything in Chol HaMoed. We do that. We read, Yom HaSheni, Yom HaShlishi, and then we go back and read the 2 of them together. Maybe, I don't know. They'd have to come up with something, because the Mishnayos had a very hard time figuring out how to do this. So that's what the Gemara's answer. Says the Gemara, Hanicha, all right, that's an interesting answer. I could see now how you could have a distinction according to Rav, who says that the Shkalim laning is the same as Rosh Chodesh, such that when Rosh Chodesh and Shkalim fall out on the same day, that we have a distinction. Hanicha Lamanda Amar, the Seder Parshios Uchozer, that after all of the Dala Parshios, that we go back to reading the regular Parsha of the day, because normally we wouldn't have. That was the Havamin of the Gemara, is that when we have these days, we wouldn't do a regular laning. Ela Lamanda Amar, the Seder Haftaros Hu Chozer, Uparshasa de Yoma Karinan. But according to the one who says that no, we never swap out the Parsha of the week. We just add on extra liyahs. If it's 3 lanings, then fine. Shvi becomes one and Maftir becomes another. But we never change the Parsha Sadiyoma. If that's true, then my shani, there's no distinction at all. Says the Gemara, Rav still has an answer. That even if it's the case that on a day when Parsha Shkalim and Rosh Chodesh fall out, and the laning for both of them is really the same as Rosh Chodesh laning, I still have a distinction. Shani, halfway down, the Rosh Chodashim on Rosh Chodesh, Karushisa b'inyane diyoma v'chad kari b'derosh Chodesh, where I'd lane 6 aliyahs of whatever parsha it is, and 1 aliyah of Rosh Chodesh. V'ilu ha'idna, but on a day when parsha Shkalim and Rosh Chodesh coincide, Karu, this is a mistake in the language, the numbers are reversed. Karu arba b'inyane diyoma. You're right, we don't forego the whole initial parsha, whatever the actual parsha is. We lane 4 aliyahs of the initial parsha, Utlasa karba the Rosh Chodesh, and in the last 3 aliyahs, we lane from Rosh Chodesh. So that's what the Gemara says. So then he has a real shita. Then Rav's shita is able to be substantiated. Good. Says the Gemara a little bit more than halfway down. Meisvei, we have another question. Rosh Chodesh Adar Shechalios b'Shabbos. If you have Rosh Chodesh that falls out on Shabbos, so that means we're going to lay in Shkalim that day. Korin Parshas Shkalim. We read Parshas Shkalim. Umaftirin beYehoyada HaKohen. And we read about Yehoyada HaKohen. Now we know, as an assumption of the Gemara, that the laning always has to have a pasuk connection to the Haftorah in some way, shape, and form. So Bishlam Alaman Damar Kitisa, if the Haftarah that we're reading is Yehoyada HaKohen, and if the parsha that we're reading is Kisisa, we're speaking about money, we're speaking about shkalim, we're speaking about valuation. I got it. Everything makes perfect sense. According to Rab, who says that Parshas Shkalim is the Kriya for Rosh Chodesh, there's nothing in that Haftorah that links. And that's not possible. Haftarah has to be linked to the actual Kriya. But if your Kriya is about Rosh Chodesh and you're laning Yehoyada, nothing links at all. So how could Rav have a Shita? Says the Gemara, it's only dummy in the following way. Third time we're seeing this today, Kidreb Tavi. Like we started, that the psukim of Tzaves Bnei Yisrael have a hint in them toward Korbanos and Truma and Shkalim, and therefore it can fit even according to Rav. Next, last question, and we're going to get to some Psak Halacha. Meisvei. Chalios beparsha smuchala. Let's say it happens to be your laning. Yeah, it happens to be that that Shabbos is Parshas Kisisa. That's great, and you have to lane. So Bain says the Gemara, it's beparsha smuchala. Baini lefaneh, baini la'achareh. Koranosa v'kolfanosa. We read it and we double it. We're going to analyze what doubling means in a minute, but we see here that we are able to read it. But if it's Parshas Kisisa, so how does this all? It only works according to Shmuel. If you're on the Parsha of Kisisa and you're saying, "Hey, great, it's the same laning," who does that work with? Only according to Shmuel. Bishlama l'man damar Kisisa. Yeah, it's Parshas Kisisa, and I hold that Shkalim is Kisisa. Then Hainu Dimisrami Ba'hu Zimna. That makes sense. It's possible that Shabbos could coincide. Again, not necessarily with our calendar, but it's possible that Shabbos could coincide where Kisisa of the regular lanings of the Parsha coincides with Parsha Shkalim. You'll never have a coinciding of Sefer Bamidbar, Parshas Pinchas, in March. That doesn't happen. Mimi Srami Be'ahu Zimna. Will you ever find a time where Rav's laning of Shkalim, which he holds, is in Bamidbar, deep? It's a couple of months out. That's going to fall out and overlap in March for us to have the same laning be two things in one? Not possible. Says the Gemara, yes, it is possible. How could there be a case scenario where you have Sefer Bamidbar read in March? Says the Gemara, Livnei Ma'arava, for the Jews who live in Eretz Yisrael, to Maske Lidoraisa B'tzlas Shinin. Unbelievable. They don't finish the Torah every year. We dance. We don't let them put the Sefer Torah. We're finishing Sefer Dvarim. We lay in Breishis, Chasen Torah, Chasen Breishis. We're great. That's not what they did. Took 3 years. There's 54 parshios, 18 parshios a year. They broke them up differently. We don't even know how from here. To look in the Rishonim and the Meforshim, see what happened. But in Eretz Yisrael, that was the real thing. It was actually possible that Bamidbar would fall out at that time. And maybe, just maybe, Rav has a way where he holds that Parsha Shkalim is Vaydaber Hashem and Moshe Lemor Tzabes Bnei Yisrael V'Talem. And then in one random year, it happened to be that way, that they would read that way. Now, it's interesting that Tosfos, somebody, Rashi, notes, I can't remember where I saw it. I thought it was Tosfos, but it's not here. But somebody notes that that in our time, that's not how we lay. It must have been Rashi. Okay, I can't find the Rashi right. I didn't mark it. 2 lines from the bottom. Right, Kamosha Anu Osin. Yeah. So from the time, this is a long time actually, from the times of Rav to Rashi was 900 years approximately. Somewhere between those 2 times, we figured it out, and we started doing an annual cycle. Even in Bavel, right?
Rav was in Bavel.
Even in Bavel, they already had a 12-year cycle. That's correct. A 12-month cycle.
So it's a little bit difficult to say that, Rav's talking about that which is in Eretz Yisrael. He was involved.
But Eretz Yisrael certainly at that time was doing what he just said.
Yeah. But
who says it though? Was Rav. The Gemara's recommendation doesn't have a name. In Livnei Ma'arava Damaskele Deraisa B'tzlash.
No, but it only works according to Rav. Meaning we're answering up. Well, how could Rav possibly explain away a Gemara that says you come to the same parsha?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. It only
never happened in Rav's
right. But he's speaking generally about halacha. That's not. I mean, it could happen. Yeah, it's a good question. It's a good question. Very good. 2/3 of the way down. How do we paskin? Tanya Kabasi de Shmuel. We have a brisa like Shmuel that it's Parshas Kisisa. So what does the brisa say? Rosh Chodesh Adar Shchalios b'Shabbos Korn Kisisa Maftir Yehoyada HaKohen. That's like a strong period, a stop. We're ready to go. We understand. Good. We paskin that way. Don't make a mistake. If you're ever landing for Parshas Kisisa, don't roll to Pinchas. Someone that's good. No one will know how wrong you are because most people don't know the other shita that it might be Rosh Chodesh landing. But really, it's not so off. If somebody were to lane that, you probably would be Yotzei. It's a very reasonable thing to assume. If Rav Tavi at the top of the Gemara is used 3 times on the page, his svara is a real svara to say that these psukim hint to Truma and Shkalim v'chudah. Okay, says the Gemara. Next, all connected, but a little bit of different sugya. We're 15, 20 lines from the bottom. Amar Rav Yitzchak Nafcha. Oh my Hashem, we are not going to finish. Big trouble. This is big Gemara. What can I do? I'll stop wherever I have to stop.
Worst case scenario, don't read single.
That's not one of the options. Amar Rav Yitzchak Nafcha. Rosh Chodesh Adar Shechalios b'Shabbos, when Rosh Chodesh of Adar falls out on Shabbos, and that's therefore also Shkalim. Therefore, Motzi and Shalosh Taras v'Karm ben Echad binyan Shal Yom. That Shabbos is Parsha. V'Echad b'Shal Rosh Chodesh. V'Echad b'Chisisa. In that order and that many Torahs. Then seemingly he makes another statement. Rav Yitzchak Nafcha, Rosh Chodesh Teves Shchalios b'Shabbos. Teves, which is Chanukah. It's not, but it's that Rosh Chodesh is still Chanukah. Then Mevi and Shalosh Taras v'Karm behen Echad b'Inyan Shal Yom. V'Echad b'Rosh Chodesh. V'Echad b'Chanukah. So why both? We're saying the same thing. You got 3 chiyuvim on the day, you bring out 3 sifrei Torah. Vitzricha, we need both. If I only had the statement by Chanukah, so b'hakam Rabbi Yitzchak, only there do we take out 3 sifrei Torah. Aval behach, watch this little spin. Aval behach, but had it been that we didn't have it that way, we only had one pasuk, we only had one by Chanukah, then it would have been maybe kirav svirale. To Amar Parsha Shkalim es Korbani Lechmi Ushtei Torah Sagi Kamash Malan. Maybe if you wouldn't have said it explicitly that when it's Rosh Chodesh Adar we say 3 Sifrei Torah, so we couldn't just say Chanukah, because then I could have implied that on Rosh Chodesh Adar when I have 3 things going on, it's Shabbos, it's Rosh Chodesh, and it's Shkalim. So maybe I hold like Rav. So therefore, Rav Yitzchak Nafka had to be explicit about the fact that when it's Rosh Chodesh Adar, we hold like Shmuel. But says the Gemara, what about the opposite? Maybe I should only have Adar and not speak about Chanukah. I don't need the Chanukah one. If what you were concerned about is maybe we could misunderstand Rav Yitzchak Nafka that he holds like Rav instead of Shmuel, then just write that. Forget the Chanukah one. Says the Gemara, you're right. It actually might not have been 2 statements. Chara michlal chaver to itmar. The Chanukah one was just someone made an extension, but lav dafka that he said it in a shiur, or he was just kind of saying the obvious. Whatever the Gemara's answer is, it's not a problem. Next, Itmar, Amoraim, what do they say? Rosh Chodesh Teves, Shechalios Bechol. If Rosh Chodesh Teves, so that's Chanukah season, and that falls out during the week. Amar of Yitzchak, Karut Tlasa, we read 3 things. Rosh Chodesh, we read 3 aliyahs on Rosh Chodesh. V'chad b'Chanukah, and the 4th aliyah is Chanukah. So that's 3 Rosh Chodesh, the last one's Chanukah. Rav Dimi Dimin Chaifa Amar, it's reversed. The first 3 aliyahs are Chanukah related, and then the last one is Rosh Chodesh. Amar Rav Mani. Rav Mani says, I understand the first shita that we read 3 Rosh Chodesh aliyahs followed by 1 Chanukah aliyah. Why? Because of a well-known principle in Shas, the tadir v'she'eno tadir kodem. It's close, but they're almost at as many days as Chanukah as there are Rosh Chodesh, but not quite. And maybe that's not how we determine Tadiris anyway. Is it number of days? Is it number of episodes? That's its own conversation, but not for now. But because Tadir Rishenu Tadir Kodem, we therefore need to lane Rosh Chodesh first and Chanukah second. Ravav and I disagree. Kavase de Rav Dimi mistabra that Chanukah should become first. Why should Chanukah become first? Mi garam leRavi Yavo. What causes a 4th aliyah in the first place? Rosh Chodesh. It's not Chanukah. Rosh Chodesh is the rarity; it's not the norm. So therefore, Hilkach Revi Rosh Chodesh by Mikri. Therefore, it needs to be that the 4th aliyah gets the Rosh Chodesh laning. My Have Allah. How do we paskin? Machlokes. Rav Yosef Amar Ein Mashgichin beRosh Chodesh. We ignore Rosh Chodesh and put the aliyah in the 4th spot. That's the shita of Rav Dimi. Rav Yosef in the name of Rav Dimi. And Rabba Amar Ein Mashgichin b'Chanukah. We ignore Chanukah. Hilchasa Ein Mashgichin b'Chanukah. We ignore Chanukah beRosh Chodesh Iker, and Chanukah gets the 4th aliyah. That's how we paskin also, right? Okay. Says the Gemara. Is that how we paskin? Yeah. Imashkichem b'Chanukah. Yeah. Itmar chalios be'atot tetzaveh. If you are in Parshas Tetzaveh, Amar of Yitzchak Nafcha karu shisa. We read 6 aliyahs mi ve'atot tetzaveh ad kisisa. We finish the whole parsha in 6 aliyahs, and then in the 7th aliyah, v'chad mi kisisa. Then we just do 1 aliyah into the next week's parsha. So Tetzaveh, Kisisa.
Tetzaveh is always Zachor, or is this the 3-year deal?
Huh?
Tetzaveh is always Zachor. But that's
No, first of all, that might be in our calendar.
Right.
That may not be, that's Lamaisa. That may not be true here. I was thinking about that while I was learning, but I wasn't even sure that that I was right. But now that you're saying it, but it doesn't matter here because, it matters, but it may not apply here because the Gemara is not necessarily in psak form yet. So the Gemara says on that day, when you're trying to be Yotze, what are you going to do? So you'll be Yotze by Parshas Shkalim. You'll read all of Parshas Tetzaveh in 6 aliyahs. And then when you're done, you'll read the 7th aliyah from another parsha. Now remember, their chumashim were not our chumashim. They were probably just listening. And they didn't have the breakdowns of all of the aliyahs like we had it. What we have, we're blessed. We have everything laid out perfectly. Amar Abaye, I'm concerned. Because they're not looking in a chumash, top of Lamed Amud Aleph, Amre okumehu deka mokme lahasam. People will just say that you stopped and you just stopped over there. That's where the aliyah ends. What do they know? Not everyone was a Talmud Chacham. So that was the concern. Rashi, top of the line. Klomar ein hadavar nikar l'shem parshas shkalim el sabre shelo nistaima parshas v'atat. That's when it finishes. They don't know. You have to be somewhat of a Talmud Chacham, and you certainly have to be listening. Otherwise, you for sure won't know. So says the Gemara. Therefore, Abaye doesn't like the suggestion of breaking all of Tetzaveh into 6 aliyahs and making the 7th into Shkalim. Ella, what does he say? Amar Abaye, karushisa mi ve'atat Tetzaveh ad ve'asisa. You read all the way through Shkalim, and then v'chad tani v'kari mechisisa ad ve'asisa. So you read from the beginning of Tetzaveh into the beginning of Kisisa to the end of that laning, and then you go back and read the last one again. That works out nicely. Meisvei, says the Gemara, hang on one second. We had said in this Mishnah that if a parsha is close by, which is this parsha of Kisisa, then you read it and you double it. According to Abaye, Nicha, it makes sense because he said we double it. We read Kisisa once and then we go back and read it a second time. Ella l'Rav Yitzchak Nafcha kasha, but it doesn't work according to Rav Yitzchak Nafcha. According to Rav Yitzchak Nafcha, you're not repeating anything. But we said in the Brisa that you do repeat. That's a good question. Says the Gemara 8 lines down. Lamed Amud Aleph Amar Lach Rav Yitzchak Nafcha Ula Abaye minicha. You think this brisa is kaftor v'ferach that it works so smoothly? For Abaye, it doesn't. Teinach lefaneha. I could understand how you could have the parsha overlapping, whereas you have tetzaveh followed by kisisa. Then we have something doubling. Yeah, that makes sense. But la'achareha. But in the next week, hechi mishkachas la. It's a different parsha. Where's your doubling now? So it says the Gemara, it must be kofla b'shabbasos that you're in that case. How would Abaye answer that you read it? You read it both Shabboses. You read the same thing 2 Shabboses in a row, and therefore hachanami kofla b'shabbasos. We'd answer the same thing over here. 12 lines down or so. Chalios b'chisisa atzma. What happens if Shabbos falls out to be Parshas Kisisa itself? So simple. Amar Rav Yitzchak Nafcha. Karushisa mean ve'asisa ad vayakel. You're going to read from Sheni. Ve'asisa is the end of the actual kriya for Shkalim. Ve'asisa, you're going to read from Sheni to the end of the parsha, and then you circle back to Rishon. V'chad kari michisisa ad ve'asisa. So you read Sheni shleishi revi chamishi shvi, then you go back and read Rishon. Clever. No one will miss that. You're starting in the wrong place, right? You're starting at Sheni, and even if you are not a Talmud Chacham, but like everybody knows, like the first pasuk of most parshios, like it would be weird if you started in totally the wrong place. We would know, hopefully. So it says the Gemara, that can't work. Why not? 2 lines before the wide lines. Maskifla Abaye, no. Hashta Amri Lemafreu Dekari. They'll say you don't know what you're talking about. You started with Sheni, you're going back to Rishon after Shvi. You're an Amoritz. They're the wrong ones, but the way that it looks doesn't look right. I mean, okay, in our shows, we make announcements, and some shows they have page numbers, and some shows they have questions before each aliyah, whatever. But the point is that it doesn't look right. Elo Amar Abaye, this is not the way to do it. Karushisa, you read 6 aliyahs from the beginning of the parsha, ad vayakel, and then v'chad tani v'kari mikitisa ad ve'asisa. Then you go back and you do Rishon again. That's already normal. Then it doesn't look like you missed anything. Then you're going back for a very specific reason. It removes all the concern. And in fact, the Brisa agrees, first long line, Tanya Kavas Abaye, Chalios b'chisisa atzma. If it happens to be that Shabbos is Parshas Kisisa, Koren osa v'koflen osa, beautiful Raya Brura, that we paskin like Abaye, that in a case like that, we would read the whole parsha of Kisisa, and then we'd go back to the beginning and we'd read Kisisa again. Okay, we're at the 2 dots, second line of the wide lines, Lamed Amud Aleph. we're gonna have to stop at 9:30, one way or the other, because I'm sure people have to daven Marv. But we'll get as far as we can, hopefully, to the Mishnah. Chalios besocha Shabbos. What happens if it falls out to be during the week? Maktimin leShabbos she'avra. We had said in our Mishnah that if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out during the week, we bump it to the Shabbos prior. We bump Parshas Shkalim to the Shabbos prior. Itmar Amoraim Machlokes. Rosh Chodesh Adar shechalios be'erev Shabbos. Let's say Rosh Chodesh falls out on a Friday. Big machlokes in the Amoraim. Rav Amar Makdimin Ushmuel Amar Me'achrin. Rav says that we make it to the earlier Shabbos. If Friday is Rosh Chodesh, if it's going to fall out that way, then we do the previous Shabbos. But if it's not that way, that's according to Rav. But then if it falls out on Friday, and according to Shmuel, we push it off. Why? Rav Amar Makdim, and why does Rav say we bring it to the earlier Shabbos? To Im Kain, remember our initial concern, because we need to have 2 weeks of Shulchanos. And we won't have 2 weeks of Shulchanos if you aren't going to do Shkalim until Shabbos. So we need to bring it the week earlier because Rosh Chodesh is Aleph, and we need 2 weeks. And that's not enough. So therefore, we do the Shkalim, we do the laning on the Shabbos prior, which gives more than 2 weeks. Shmuel Amar Me'achron, Shmuel is not bothered by Rav's concern. Why not? Amar Lach, sof chamesar b'malei Shabsa. If Rosh Chodesh falls out on a Friday, then 2 Fridays from now will be the 15th on Erev Shabbos, Mikla. That's when it will fall out. The Shulchanos lo nafke ad achad b'shvat. No matter what, they won't go out till Sunday anyways. Doesn't have to be a full 2 weeks, mamish. Don't worry about it. They'll get in enough time. Hilkach me'achron, and therefore we push it off. Let's get into the discussion. This is the Machlokes, Rav and Shmuel. If Rosh Chodesh falls out on a Friday, if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on a Friday, Rav says we bring Shkalim to the Shabbos prior, and Shmuel says, no, we're going to do it tomorrow on the second day of the month of Adar. Tanan, Mishnah. Chalios besoch Shabbos makdim in the Shavar mafsik in the Shabbos acheres. So we said that if Rosh Chodesh falls out throughout the week, then makdim, and we make it earlier, to the previous Shabbos, and then we take 1 week off. But the Reisha of the Mishnah writes there that we bring it earlier. That's a big problem for Shmuel, because Shmuel was of the opinion that we push it off 1 Shabbos. So it says the Gemara, my lava filu be'er Shabbos. Doesn't that seem to imply that if Rosh Chodesh fell out during the week, even on Friday, that we would push it to the Shabbos prior, and Shmuel bekasha the Shmuel. So it says the Gemara, no, lo besoch haShabbos dafka. We're only talking about a weekday that's surrounded by weekdays on both sides. That's not mashma from the Gemara. That's how some of the Rishonim explain this Gemara, is that when we say weekday, yes, Friday is a weekday, but it's not a full weekday because the next day is not Rosh Chodesh. The next day is not, a weekday. So that's a very tough answer that requires some research how we distinguished Friday from other days. It is a weekday. It's mutter b'malacha. It's not. It's a weekday, but that's what some of the Rishonim explain. Next, third of the way down, a little bit more, and 8-9 lines into the wide lines. Tashma, Ezo hi Shabbos Rishona. What is going to be the first Shabbos? So let's see what this means. Kol shechal Rosh Chodesh Adar lios besocha. Any week that has Adar in it, ve'afilu be'erev Shabbos. Even if it's going to be on Erev Shabbos, that's going to be considered the week of Shkalim, the week of Parshas Shkalim, the first week of Adar. My love, doesn't that seem to include afilu be'erev Shabbos dumya desocha? Maybe that Friday should be similar to the weekdays themselves. Masocha makdim and erev Shabbos makdim, that even erev Shabbos should be included to be like Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, which is surrounded by weekdays. Maybe we should assume erev Shabbos is the same. Amar Shmuel ba. One word answer. That one word answer means we misunderstood the brisa. And if we look back up 2 lines, we'll explain according to Shmuel's new lens here. Ezo hi Shabbos Rishona, kol shechal Rosh Chodesh Adar lios besocha. What does besocha mean? We translated it as during the week. Shmuel doesn't. Shmuel means that that's when it falls out on Shabbos and ve'afilu be'erev Shabbos. Besocha doesn't mean during the week. Shmuel says it means that's what on Shabbos means. Ba, on it. It's Rosh Chodesh is not it. You misunderstood. Besocha means ba. That's how we understand the Mishnah. There was also a brisa taught in the Beis Medrash Shmuel with the word ba in it instead of besocha. And really, this discussion about whether or not, if Rosh Chodesh fell out on a Friday, whether or not we go to the week prior or to the week after, Machlokes Rav and Shmuel, that is Kitanoi, exactly halfway down, Lamed Amud Aleph, Misargin, the Shabbosos Tivir Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. We alternate Shabbos. Week 1 is Shkalim, week 2 is off, week 3 is the second of the 4 parashos of Zachor. So we're Misargin from Seirugin, alternating. Now, Reb Shimon ben Elazar Omer Ein Misargin. No, it's 1 week sequential. There's no breaks. And then here's the shita that gives Shmuel a little bit of latitude. Omer Reb Shimon ben Elazar Ein Masai Ani Omer Ein Misargin. When is it that there's no alternating, where week number 2 is not an empty week of the Daled Parshios? Bisman shechalios be'erev Shabbos. Then there's no misargin. Abba bisman shechalios besocha Shabbos mekadmin v'korei b'Shabbos she'avra afal pi shehu shvat. Then even everyone's going to agree under those circumstances to the halacha, and this allows for Rav and Shmuel to both have their shitas in the Tanoim as well. Good. Bishnia Zachor. We said the second of the Daled Parshios is Parsha Zachor, probably the most famous of them all. We're very, very makbid that men and women and children should be there to hear Parsha Zachor. It's a big deal. It's not the only time of year you can be Yotzei, which is a very important point. There's big shilos and poskim. Why don't we make a bracha? We're fulfilling a mitzvah d'oraisa. Why don't we make a bracha? So that's a good discussion. Says the Gemara, opening up, Itmar Purim Shechalios Erev Shabbos. If Purim Yud Daled Nisan falls out to be on a Friday, says the Gemara, Rav Amar Maktim in Parsha Zachor, Shmuel Amar Ma'achron. Sounds familiar. This is a very similar machlokes, though instead of the previous conversation of Rosh Chodesh on Friday, now we're talking about Purim on Friday. So why do they have their own sheets? As Rav Amar Makdim, and why does Rav say to the Shabbos prior? Rav says the reason why we move it to the Shabbos prior when Purim falls out on Yud Dalet on Friday is ki hechi delo tiktu masil l'zechira. Because if Yud Dalet is Friday, then we will have the asiyah, the actual mitzvos hayom employed before we learn about Parsha Zachor, and that is out of order. That's out of sequence. And we need the Zechira to be earlier. Shmuel says, I understand your point, but Amar Me'achron, we still do delay. Why? Because Amar Lach, Kevan Dikamu Kafin, the walled cities, they still have Tesvav. They're still on the 15th, and then it gets pushed off to Sunday. The Avdi B'cha Meisar on the 15th. Asiyah v'Zechir b'Hadei Adadei Asyan. The chiyuv really doesn't play out that way because you can't give gifts on Shabbos. But the chiyuv would conceptually fall out on Tesvav Nisan, a Tesvav Adar, in which case the Asiyah, the mitzvos hayom, and the Zechira, the reading of Amalek, fall out on the same day. Tanan, we have a Mishnah, our Mishnah, Bishnia Zachor. The second of the Daled Parshios is Zachor. V'haki mikla reish yarcha b'Shabbos, mikla Purim be'erev Shabbos. That when Rosh Chodesh falls out on a Shabbos, so then Purim will fall out on an erev Shabbos. Think about the math. If Aleph is a Saturday, I have no idea. I don't know how you know these things. If Aleph is a Saturday, so then that Friday is going to be the 7th. Which means the next Friday is going to be the 14th. Yes, correct. So therefore, if Shabbos is if Reish Yarcha b'Shabbos Mikla, if Rosh Chodesh falls out on Shabbos, then Purim is going to always be be'erev Shabbos. The Katani b'Shnia Zachor. We see that's when we should read. That's when we should read. So it seems to be that Rav should not be Makdim. It seems from our Mishnah, although it's a little hard to infer, but the Gemara does give it's a little shrouded in complexity how this is a good argument, but the Gemara still asks its question that it does seem to be that this is the second week. Amar Papa, my Shnia, it's not Shnia, the second Parsha, it's Shnia lehafsaka. We're counting from a different point altogether. It's the second only from the Hafsaka, which means that it's gonna align with the Shita of Rav. Says the Gemara, Toshma, Ezo Shabbos Shnia, what is considered to be the second Shabbos? Kol shechal Purim lios besocha. Whenever Purim falls out to be during the week, the afilu be'erev Shabbos, even on erev Shabbos. This is a kasha and Shmuel. My love erev Shabbos to me besocha. Isn't erev Shabbos similar to the rest of the week? Masocha makdimin. Just like Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Rav was of the opinion we would make it earlier. Afer of Shabbos Makdim, and then even Shmuel would have to agree we bring it earlier. Kasha and Shmuel. Amar Shmuel, you misunderstood this too. But the word besocha doesn't mean Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. But besocha means on Shabbos. When Purim falls on Shabbos, that's when you read it. Okay, so you learn it differently. But let's keep going. Chal, if Purim begins Leos b'Shabbos Atzma, so Yud Dalet is a Saturday. Yud Dalet of Adar, Purim actually falls out that way. Amar Rav Huna l'divrei hakol ein makdim. No, there is no machlokes Rav and Shmuel here. Says the Gemara, there's a machlokes as to whether or not there's a machlokes Rav and Shmuel. This first sheet over here says no machlokes divrei hakol ein makdimin. For Rav Nachman Amar adayin hi machlokes. No. Rav and Shmuel still argue here. It's Marnami. Let's see how this plays out. How do we paskin? Amar B'chia bar Abba, Amar Rav Abba, Amar Rav, Purim shechaliyos b'Shabbos makdim v'kori b'Shabbos she'avra zachor. Wow. He says you still bring it earlier, which clearly indicates that there's a machlokas still between Rav and Shmuel. We're at the two dots. Let's get as far as we can. Says the Gemara, b'Shlishis para aduma. The third week is the Parshas Para. Tanu Rabbanan Ezo he Shabbos Shlishi. So let's discuss the third Shabbos. Kol shesmucha lePurim me'achareha. Whatever is closest to Purim, but that follows Purim. Itmar Rabbi Chama b'Reb Chanina Amar Shabbos esmucha l'Rosh Chodesh Nisan. I disagree. He says it's the Shabbos that's after Purim, but closer to Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Below Pligi, neither of them argue. It's just two different frames of reference. According to one sheet that we're discussing Rosh Chodesh Nisan, which falls out on Shabbos, and Hadikla be'emsa Shabbos, and the other is talking about when Rosh Chodesh falls out during the week. So, however they do their math, you have to really get into the nuances here. But that is not a machlokas. But really, we assume that Parshas Zachor is always read in the third week. Not Zachor, excuse me. Parshas Par is always read in the third week, the week that is after Purim. The Revi's HaChodesh Hazel Lechem, Parshas HaChodesh, we know from where we started, HaChodesh Hazel Lechem, Rosh Chodashim, 6-7 lines from the bottom. Tanu Rabbanan, Rosh Chodesh Adar Shechalios B'Shabbos. If Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out to be on a Saturday, Koren Kisiso Maftirim Yehoyada. We saw this already, that we read Kisiso like Shmuel from the previous Amud, and the Maftir is Yehoyada. Ve'ezo Hi Shabbos Rishona. What is considered to be the first Shabbos? How do we calculate it? Simple. Kol shechal Rosh Chodesh Adar lios besocha. Any week that Shabbos that Rosh Chodesh falls out in it, ve'afilu be'erev Shabbos, even on erev Shabbos, that is the right week to read it. B'shniya Zachor, the second of the parshios is Zachor umaftir and Pakati, which speaks about Amalek as well. Be'ezui Shabbos Shniya. How do we determine the second Shabbos when we're supposed to read Parsha Zachor? Kol shechal Purim lios besocha ve'afilu erev Shabbos. It's always going to be the Shabbos prior to Purim. The Shlishis Para Aduma. What about Parshas Para? So Umaftir v'zarakti alechem ma'im tahor. We're talking about Tara and Tuma, and the Para Aduma talks about Tara and Tuma. Ve'ezo hi Shabbos Shlishis. How do we determine which Shabbos is the third Shabbos? Kol shesmucha lePurim me'achareh. We just discussed in the Gemara. It has to be the third week. And Berevi's, how do we determine HaChodesh Hazeh? Umaftir and Ko Amar Hashem Elokim B'Rishon Be'echad HaChodesh. That there speaks about the month, and that explains what the Haftorah is. Let's turn to the top of Daf Lamed Amud Beis. Ve'ezo hi Shabbos Revi's. How do we determine the fourth Shabbos? Kol shechal Rosh Chodesh Nisan lios besocha v'afilu b'erev Shabbos. Whatever week Rosh Chodesh Nisan is in, that's the week that we're going to read Parshas HaChodesh. Bechamishis, we're going to make it. Bechamishis chozrin l'chasidron. We said in our Mishnah that in the fifth week, after all of the Dalet Parshios, we go back to regular. L'seder Mai, we go back to regular. What are you referring to? So Rav Ami Amar L'seder Parshios Uchozer. During the 4 weeks, we didn't read the regular. We do this. So this first sheet is not how we paskin. But the first sheet that the Gemara presents is that when it was Parshas, whatever, Parsh Shkalim, or any of the Dalet Parshios, we didn't read the regular Parsha that week. It threw us off completely. That's what it says. And therefore, we go back to Seder Parshios. We stopped ditching the regular laning. We go back to the Parsha that we should have read 4 weeks ago, and now we're going to read it now. Amar Abaye, Rabbi Yirmiyah Amar, L'seder Haftaros Uchozer. We go back to regular Haftaros, but we never change the Inyan Diyoma. We always lane the regular Shabbos. That's how we paskin, of course. Says the Gemara, Amar Abaye Kavase the Ravami Mistaber. Abaye says it's like the initial shita that seems to say that when we have the Dalet Parshios, that it swaps out the regular learning. That's not La Kol Mafsik in the Rosh Chodashim the Chanukah L'Purim L'Tanis L'Mojos Yom Kippurim. Because why is Rav Ami right that it must be that we skip the Parshios? Because of our Mishnah. Our Mishnah had said that we interrupt our own regular laning for Rosh Chodesh, Chanukah, Purim, Tainios, Mamados, and Yom Kippurim. Now, Bishlam Alamandar Seder Parshios Uchozer. I understand the Shita of Rav Ami that says that after the 4 weeks, after the Dalet Parshios, we go back to regular laning. Hainu Dika Parsha Bechol. Because what were some of the exclusions that we said were interrupted? They were weekday things like Purim and Chanukah. Those are weekday things and they get interrupted. So that shows you that we're interrupting regular laning, not just Haftorah. That's great raya. Says the Gemara, it's not a great raya at all. The last of the short lines, according to the second sheet of the sheets of Rav Yirmiyah, says that we never interrupted regular laning, we only interrupted Haftarahs. How does he understand the brisa? Haftarah b'chol me'ika. How can you say that it's Haftarah? Purim is always during the week. By Chanukah for most of its days, it's during the week. We skip regular laning. What kind of Haftarah is there? You must be wrong, Rav Yirmiyah. Says the Gemara, he's not wrong. How would he answer it? It just depends on the day. When there's no other option, I agree with you. Of course, on Purim, we trump regular laning. I agree. On a Monday or Thursday that's Purim, we don't lane the regular laning, of course. But when there's a Haftarah, we don't change the regular Inyan Diyoma. We read the regular laning. That's the sheet of Rav Yirmiyah. Says the Gemara, a little connected, but moving on a little bit. Second of the wider lines, third of the way down. In regards to tainis, why do we change the laning? Why don't we just leave it? We lane twice that day. We lane Shacharis, potentially, and we lane Mincha. Likri mitzafra b'inyan adiyom. On Monday, Thursday, we should read a regular laning, whatever the parshas of that coming Shabbos. Ubi mincha b'tanisa. We'll read b'yifsa. We'll read the laning for the tainis at Mincha. Says the Gemara, this actually supports the sheet of Rav Huna, Dam Rav Huna, Mitzafra kinufia, because in the morning there's a large gathering of people. Okay, heichi avdin, and how should we spend our fast day? Amar Abai mitzafra lapalga diyomar, from the morning until halfway to the day. Me'ayninan b'mili damata. We should look into the city's functioning, make sure it's healthy, make sure it's running well. From a Musar perspective, what are we doing wrong as a community? Because it's a fast day. That's what the Rambam says. All of these fast days are meant to teach us to do tshuva. Mipalga diyoma lapanya, from the halfway points of the day till nighttime. Riva diyoma karo miftare. 1/4 of that time should be spent reading from the Torah and doing Haftarah. And the second half, the last quarter of the day should be done davening to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for Rachamim. Shneimar ve'ikruba sefer Torah Hashem Elokem revi'is hayom mizvadim u'mishtachavim. Says the Gemara ve'puchana. Maybe we should assume it's the opposite, that we check on the city the second half of the day, and the reading of the Torah and the Musar that we give ourselves is in the beginning of the day. Says Gemara lo sal kadaitach. You cannot assume such a thing. Dichsiv ve'elai asvu kol chared bidvari Elokei Yisrael al me'al Hagolav ani yoshev mishamam ad leminchas ha'erev. Uchsiv, it also says minchas ha'erev kamti mitainasi, that at the end I got up from my fast. I started working on myself. I started changing things, and that's how we know we are supposed to stay focused on ourselves in the afternoon. In the city in the morning, we'll stop right here. Pick up tomorrow in Yirtzeh Hashem with one blot. Baruch Hashem. Daf Lamed Aleph. Wishing you all a beautiful night.